Oh, looks like it's live.
Okay, it looks like we are live. So,
Nice.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual town hall hosted by your 5th District legislators. Today, you will be seeing and hearing from Senator Mark Mullet and Representatives Bill Ramos and Lisa Callan. Some of you have already submitted questions in advance, and I will read those questions to the lawmakers as we go through them. You will also be able to submit questions on the live feed through the chat box, so please do so. And before we begin, let's start with some introductions. Representative Callan, why don't you go first?
Great, thanks. So Lisa Callan, I am serving on the Children, Youth, and Families Committee, the K-12 Education Committee, and Vice Chair of Capital Committee this year in the House. I'm excited to be here for you. And are we just doing introductions, or are we doing a little bit more of an intro?
Go ahead, Lisa. Give you a little intro.
Okay. So this last legislative session, we spent a lot of time really focusing on, the major response from an economic recovery perspective, a pandemic health perspective, making sure that we're dealing with all of the issues that came forward on equity, that we have a lot of work to do across the state in that realm, and climate change and our environmental impacts and what we're doing around that. So I think you'll see that a lot of the legislation that we brought forward focused mostly on those priorities. There was certainly other work that came across our desks, but as we were trying to prioritize the virtual reality that we were in, and the work that needed to be done to make sure all the constituents across the 5th and the state really had what they need to make it through this crazy last 18 months. That was where we were focused on, and that certainly was true of my committees. So I'll pass it on to you all.
Go ahead, Representative Ramos. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Representative Bill Ramos, and great. I'm very happy you folks are taking a little bit out of your time this evening to join us and hear some things, and we'll get to answer some questions. It was interesting. We've all lived a different life here for this last year and a half, basically. The one good thing is the session I think we did virtually was pretty successful, considering the things we had to do and everybody else is dealing with. I think we've come through this fairly well. Some of the things I focused on for sure was after all the social justice issues. I was on the policing policy leadership team in the public safety committee, working on changing policing, making reforms there, and working with police and communities. Also, I'm vice chair on transportation and working a lot there. We did work a lot on a transportation package. Didn't quite get that through, but we did a lot of other transportation work as well, and that will continue on. And then also in the climate arena, I work on the natural resource side, working always in carbon sequestration, trying to take advantage of our forests, and did some work in what we call a community forest and urban forestry bill, trying to help those forests that are closest to our centers of population. And again, thank you for being here tonight, and take it away, Senator.
Okay. I'm Mark Mullet from Issaquah, and I think for me, some of the things going into the session starting January 11th was trying to find ways to get our kids back to school safely and trying to find ways to get our small businesses back open safely. I do think the legislature being in session, I think we're successful in kind of applying pressure to the governor's office. It was very difficult to apply when we weren't in session. And I know we didn't, you're really back to school until April, but at least for my kids, I feel it made a big difference. We did salvage the last couple months of the year. I know like my 6th grader was able to do track and things like that. And my 9th grader is doing baseball. And that really is kind of making the school year end in the next week on a much more positive note than where we were back in the fall. Commend all our teachers for getting through what's been a very challenging year out in the education space. And with our small businesses, I was really happy, for one, that we were able to get things back open again after session started. It took us a few weeks. And then there were some times where we thought we might go backwards in April, and even May, where we were able to persuade the governor not to do that. And I think we made the right decision in hindsight, because we finally are seeing cases drop. And obviously now we're at the point where at some point this month, we will have a full successful reopening. And kudos to our legislative district, does an excellent job of getting vaccinated. And we're one of the best legislative districts in the state. We should be proud. And that's played a huge role in being able to get this back open. So we're ready to go to questions. I don't know which one we're going to start with.
All right. So the way that we're going to do this today, because we sent out an invite with how this was going to work out and a link for people to submit questions, we're going to go through those first because we do have a lot of them. So we're going to try to get through as many of those as we can. And then as we start, whittling down, or as we, finish with those, then we're going to start taking the live questions in the feed. Okay. So let's get to it. First question is from Anne. And Anne asks, what are the most important pieces of legislation that you will work toward to achieve crucial carbon emission reduction goals by 2030 and 2050? Please be specific about what combination of bills need to be added to bills you've already passed and how they would work with efforts at federal and local levels.
I'll jump in here. I think with the two big carbon bills we passed this last legislation session was the carbon cap and invest bill, and also the low carbon fuel standard bill. And those were ones that have been talked about for years. And this is the first time they actually got passed. So those are definitely going to make a mark on our the carbon in the future. So that is a big first step for us on those two areas, and they're going to hit a lot in the transportation sector, which is the one sector of carbon emissions that we have not really addressed much yet. We've worked with buildings and all sorts of other things, but we hadn't really gotten in the transportation sector, and that is about 45% of our greenhouse gases. So I'm really happy that we got those two pieces going, and I'll leave it at that piece and let some of y'all add some other stuff you may want to add.
Well, and I think my 2 cents would be that in 2019, we did the 100% clean energy bill. And like Representative Ramos said, we had the two big bills this session. Sometimes the legislature needs to pause and work on implementing bills effectively. And I think we're at that point. We've had three very powerful pieces of legislation to reduce carbon emissions in the state of Washington. And before we start looking at the new shiny thing on the horizon, we need to really get into the weeds of implementing policy effectively and making sure it's being done right and gets up and running. And I think there's a lot to be said for having a couple years here to focus on getting the bills we passed up and running effectively. A lot of rulemaking has to happen. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff for these bills to actually achieve the goals that we want them to achieve. And it's not sexy bill passing work, but it is very important.
The implementation period is definitely crucial, right? Because that's the rulemaking is really what's going to make the effectiveness of the legislation pass happen. That being said, I think that there is still a huge amount of conversation and bill activity that is still in the sausage making machine and happening. I know in the Capitol Committee on the House side, we certainly saw legislation and had conversations around buy fair, buy clean, build clean. What does that look like in the building trades, and what does that look like and mean? We know in the K-12 arena, where we spend a huge amount of capital dollars in the state, thinking about and talking about what we need to do in order to really move forward in making sure that we're having the best environmental practices in all of that construction and all that work that's happening is paramount and crucial. Of course, there's still the ongoing work that we need to do around our culverts and our salmon work. I mean, all of that stuff across all aspects, and taking a deeper dive from an equity lens and looking at health equity and looking at how the environment is showing up for our constituency base as well as for the earth. I think those are all things that are in the that are being discussed heavily and having a lot of dialogue back and forth, and have had their first rounds in hearings in committees that need further work and dialogue about how to move them forward. So if you know of any of those specifics, I would love to hear more about that, especially as they come across the Capitol Committee.
All right, thank you. Next, we're going to go with Carl, who asks, what seems to be the holdup on completing State Route 18 road widening and overpass? The money was secured and collected, what, 10, 15 years ago?
Well, the good news is it is on track for now. If you know the widening of Highway 18, its entire length from I-90 down to I-5 has been going on for over 30 years. They've been doing that a piece at a time. So one thing that hasn't happened is pieces weren't funded 10 or 15 years ago and people were sitting on funding. That hasn't happened. We fund it as we go. It's been pieces at a time. If you've been around it that long, you know that was 2 lanes the whole way back in the 80s, and we started doing that a piece at a time. We have the last piece left. The funding is secure for the next phase, which is the I-90 interchange with 18, and then widening down to what we call Deep Creek, or the first big bridge, if you know the road going down that way. So that will get a big chunk of it done, and the interchange. That funding is secure. We had some of it last year. We got the last piece we needed this year. And so that project will go to bid this fall, and hopefully should start up next spring, about a year from now, actual construction. It'll take a couple years to actually build that interchange and widen that road. And then the last piece we have will be the last piece of 2 or actually 3-lane road over the top of Tiger Mountain. And we'll be working to get that piece funded as quickly as we can. That will rely on a number of things. It is a lot of money. And so we'll probably need a transportation package to do that. And that is one of the things we're working on to make sure that's included in that when those discussions are happening.
And I think in the House and the Senate, both Representative Ramos and myself have been put on the group that's kind of working right now so we can have a transportation package in the fall that we actually pass and would enable us to finish Highway 18. I mean, the ideal situation is we do the interchange, we do the first widening, the first 1.5 miles or so, and then we can just keep on trucking right up through. Like if we can get a transportation package to the finish line this fall, WashDOT would be able, Washington State Department of Transportation would be able to actually just, have that project be continuous and smooth and not have a pause at all. So that would be our hope.
All right, next, Lindsay has a question. Which police reform bills were passed and how did you work to advocate for them?
I didn't hear that. Could you say that again?
Sure. This is a question from Lindsay and is asking which police reform bills were passed and how did you work to advocate for them?
I'll jump on that one since that was kind of my bailiwick. I was part of the policing policy leadership team that started about a year ago, along with all the social protests. And so we've been working all this time, bringing everybody together, all the community groups, all the people that cared, including law enforcement, union representatives, and so forth, to construct the bills that went forward. There was a package of 12 of them that did get signed. We had a signing ceremony just a few weeks ago, and they included all sorts of things in there. It's a lot, but the use of force, the type of tactics police could use. We definitely set oversight. An independent investigation team is set up. We've got a data collection that needs to be set up, which is going to be really good. That's going to really collect the data so we know exactly what's happening where. So we're getting that going. That'll help us continue into the future. We've got more impact when law enforcement does something that's not right, such as in testifying in court. So any activity that's not right, and we'll also have the police officers have the duty to intervene and when they see something wrong happening and amongst their own police officers, now they have a duty to do something or report it. So we've got those folks actually watching themselves to be better, and a lot of this is with law enforcement coordination. And you talk to them, they believe that they can do a better job when we get more accountability and more transparency. That whole story is being told all the time throughout every day, 24/7, when we can see the whole picture of what law enforcement has to deal with. And I really am proud of the way the communities and law enforcement have come together and worked towards this package that got done this year. There will be more to come. We're continuing to work on these things, and not just in police reform, but also in the justice reform. And those we're working in the interim here, and there'll be more bills that'll come next session as well.
And people should know this wasn't a defund the police session. We're adding resources to policing. We're supporting our state patrol. We're putting resources into the Criminal Justice Training Center, so our police have the skills that they need. And we've even sent out a batch of money to the cities and counties to try to help them be able to implement a lot of the bills that were passed. So anybody who says this was a defund the police session is a liar, because there was a lot of reforms, but there were reforms that also came with investments from the state dollars, because I think we want to make sure our local law enforcement has the resources they need to actually do their job.
Okay. Next, we have a question from Phoebe, who asks, what efforts the three of you have done to help the Issaquah School District? But I think we should expand it to, school districts across the Fifth.
Certainly. I mean, I think the first thing was Senator Mullet alluded to it in his opening comments, right? It was figuring out what we need to do to work with Department of Health and looking at what was the safest way to get our kids back into school. And certainly all the things that we do and needed to do around the federal funding that was coming in to try to make sure that those dollars were getting out quickly to our school districts and getting that done in an early action bill to try to get those dollars out the door so school districts could get themselves funded as best they could. The top thing I would say in the school districts across the Fifth and across the state was to stabilize their budgets, because no one could really estimate and anticipate the reduced basically all the education formulas were broken because of the pandemic. Transportation was formulas and funding that comes out is based off of ridership. The buses weren't rolling. We didn't have ridership, so we couldn't calculate those funding dollars going to districts, and they counted on them. They hired and had staff and all of that work to get our education done. So the same for the state apportionment dollars, that was done the same way. Those based off of enrollment dropped significantly, but contracts were there. People needed to be paid, and all of the work that needed to happen to make sure we got our kids back in schools. In fact, it increased workload in a lot of cases. So we were able to stabilize the school district funding so that they didn't run through extreme shortfalls at the end of this school year, which puts their fund balances in better shape for the upcoming year. And then, of course, there's still plenty of work to be done, I think, looking forward into this next year to find out how the pandemic will continue to impact our school districts and if it impacts enrollment. Behavioral health is a huge thing for our kids. I spent a large portion of the session as co-chair of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group, working on trying to figure out how we could bring a disaster response to the behavioral health needs of our kids. That's one part of the curve that still is not flattening. In fact, is increasing, and we're seeing the behavioral health needs across the state for all ages escalate. So making sure that we're bringing in tiered support services. The Department of Health is working with the Healthcare Authority, and they're partnering with our school districts and with the Office of the State Superintendent to bring forward resources and all of that work. I think another thing that we did really quickly is making sure there was partnership with childcare for, when kids weren't in school, but parents still needed to work. We needed to make sure that school age care was available during the day, figuring out how to make those partnerships and students could still learn and do all of that work. So those are just a few of the many things that we did, I think.
Well, and I would add, I think that when you ran the Excel spreadsheet, a bunch of federal money showed up in January and February. And so when you ran the Excel spreadsheet in March of how districts are doing across the state, the overall benefit to the K-12 system was plus $100 million. But when you ran it for the districts in the Fifth, we were massively negative because we don't have a lot of free and reduced lunch kids. Yet everyone in our schools knows that our districts were not in position to handle those kind of revenue losses. So I think one of the most important things that happened during the session was the state money factored in the federal money. So the state money said, we're going to make districts whole first. And so the districts in the Fifth, like Snoqualmie, Tahoma, Issaquah, not a lot of free and reduced lunch kids, but those first state dollars that came out in the education budget did actually get a much bigger help for our districts. And I know for Issaquah, that's helped to undo a lot of the rifts that were initially announced. They've already started to get undone because of the money that was sent out in a if the legislature just sent out this money in the same way the feds did, our districts would have been screwed. We had a very different approach than the federal government did of how we send money out to schools. And it benefited the districts right here in the Fifth.
All right, so we're going to shift now. We have like 3 or 4 questions on long-term care. And so instead of asking all of those, let's just summarize one. And let's see, David did a good job with summarizing those. Let's see. David is asking, can you share your thoughts about the new and unique long-term care tax starting next year? So it's very broad and open. So let's hear what your thoughts are.
I mean, I can go first. We're going to have a difference of opinion on this one, but this was
Wait,
a 2019.
Can I
Bill.
interrupt? I missed part of the question. Can before you, especially if we're going to differ on it, I want to make sure.
Oh, just talking about the long-term care,
Okay.
care act.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thanks.
it was a 2019 bill that creates a payroll tax of 0.58% to go towards long-term care insurance in the state. Starts January 1st. And I guess to summarize the questions that were submitted, a lot of people are asking about opting out. And so if you have a long-term care policy, you can definitely opt out. You need to let your employers know that you're opting out. And I think the way the law currently exists is you need to have that policy prior to November 1st. And I saw, like, one of the questions was, I know I'm moving out of state, like I don't want to do this because if you move out of state, you lose benefits from the policy. I mean, the hidden secret in Olympia, which I'm going to say publicly here, is there wasn't actually an enforcement mechanism on the opt-out piece. And so basically, people who choose to opt out will not get any benefits from the program, but it's also, there isn't like this group of 1,000 people running around trying to verify long-term care policies of people who end up opting out. So I think a lot of people just have decisions they want to make of whether or not, they think it's a good program they're going to benefit from or not. So that tax will start in January 1st of 2022.
And just to jump in there, the reason this came about, I guess if you look at our society right now, long-term care, the cost of that is a big threat to us, with particularly people getting older and a lot of people getting there where they need long-term care. And most people aren't prepared for it, and they don't have insurance. And what happens then is all that cost just goes to the state, and they have to then go through that process of becoming destitute to get state resources to do that, which is not a good thing to do for them or for the state to then take on all that. So this is part of a process to look at a problem that will affect the state severely in the future and try to alleviate that a little bit. As like many across the board programs, everybody chips in a little bit and everybody doesn't always collect everything. Now, I pay unemployment insurance, all my life. I'm not collecting unemployment. I pay into Social Security. I'm one that I can't collect Social Security. So there are systems that people pay into and everybody doesn't collect. It's a bigger picture, and we know that this will be a problem. I think if you work the numbers, I know it's a tax, but I think if you make $100,000 a year, if my math is right, it's a $58 fee. So it's not like, thousands of dollars a year. So there's trying to balance that need for us to have something and allow folks that want to opt out that have insurance another way to cover that, to have that ability. But it is a limited amount of opt out. Otherwise, everybody opts out, and then is a larger program. It doesn't. There's no validity or value to it, and that's kind of a bigger picture. That's harder to deal with and harder to say. But I say that because that to me is the honest realization of why we did that.
It's $580 a year. If you make $100,000, it's $580 a year.
I misplaced a decimal point. Sorry.
All right, so we're going to go back to education. Here's a question from Cliff. And he asks, why do you support diversity equity training for educators? It promotes divisiveness instead of unity, doesn't it?
What was the first part of that? I didn't hear.
Okay, sorry. Cliff is asking, why do you support diversity equity training for educators? It promotes divisiveness instead of unity, doesn't it?
I mean, I can speak a little to this. My wife's a teacher, and there's a lot of questions on critical race theory, that have been put out, both submitted and on the chat. I think people need to really look at what's actually in the bill. I think when you look at what's in the bill, there's not a lot different than what's already happening in every school district in the 5th legislative district right now. My wife teaches in Issaquah, and Issaquah teachers, like when they do their professional development days before school starts, they've been getting training about how to deal with people from different backgrounds for the last decade. I mean, this goes back, it's a very, I don't think you're going to find a teacher in the 5th legislative district who hasn't had a lot of professional development days already in their career devoted to this topic. So this idea that this is the first time we've talked about the importance of really training our educators in the classroom about the importance of the fact that we're going to have kids in the classroom from a variety of backgrounds, I think is a little divorced from reality. And I think I know the bill got a lot of negative press, but I read this bill like 8 different times. I'm on the education committee. I could not find anything in the actual bill that lined up with saying it's, teaching critical race theory in the state of Washington. So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it.
And I'll jump in on it wasn't quite part of the question, but the question, the critical race theory I do want to address. But the question was, teaching things would bring animosity. Well, the thing is, we have to deal with facts, and we have facts that we have a country of almost every race and ethnic group in the world, right? We come from everywhere, and we need to understand everybody and have a feel of how to work with everybody that's in our world. And so to understand that is a part of teaching what diversity is. People don't understand me and all my background, questions all the time. That's a part of what, and asking and answering those questions just brings a little bit of knowledge to folks so they can relate better together. The fact of the critical race theory as being talked about now, twice that was tried to be put on bills in the House by a member. And both, one time they dropped it, another time we voted it down. So critical race theory is definitely something that I don't think I will or anybody here will ever support, that putting that onto a bill and making that law. That is not what it's about. But we do need to accept folks. We have a mix in our district that's quite different, even not as much as other areas of our state, even more so. And we need to acknowledge that. And just that fact of being able to acknowledge it versus trying to pretend it doesn't exist, which means making laws that say you can't talk about diversity, meaning it doesn't exist, is not a way to look at different people and try to not accept them, that they're people.
So, I mean, I think this is an important enough topic that we should all speak to it and definitely, explain or answer any questions that are out there. And I would be happy to do that for any of you that want to have a direct one-on-one conversation. More than happy to do that. Also sitting on the House Education Committee, saw the same bills move forward that Senator Mullet did, and had these deep conversations and had a very long floor conversation on this bill. And I think the point of diversity, equity, and inclusion training is really to have a full understanding of all of the children, all of the youth, and all of the families that are in their classrooms that need to have a safe and welcoming place to be, to learn. If they don't feel welcome, if they feel like they have to code switch, if they feel like they don't have an identity that they can relate to, they disengage from learning and they don't have as near a chance of being successful to thrive. All of our students come unique to themselves and arrive at our K-12 schools in very different circumstances and a range of circumstances, and trying to understand what that looks like and how that means, so a teacher can differentiate instruction, so a teacher can really spark the learning and light the fire of learning and engage not only just the student, but also the whole family, so that the whole family can connect and be supportive of what it looks like to learn and be a part of that school environment. When you have families that are speaking different languages that come into the building and don't know how to fill out the forms for a field trip, that child potentially loses the opportunity for that field trip. If we understand what that is and how we can do that better and remove those barriers, then it's just a win-win for everybody in the state. It's a win-win across. So it's ultimately creates a stronger workforce. It creates stronger businesses. It creates greater secondary pathways. It creates a more global competitive state as not only from a business, but as an individual. So, I mean, there's nothing to lose. It's all about making sure that we recognize who we are, and we show up and we create the space that reflects who we are as a state. And that is multicultural, and that is that's exciting to be a part of. something we should rejoice in, I think.
And just to add, I think, like I say, this is a complex topic. And as Rep. Callan said, if anybody wants further conversation with me, I think any of us, we're open to that. And later on, after this is over, through our way, emails, whatever, please reach out if you want further conversation with us. Happy to engage. It is complex.
Okay. We have several questions or comments about the capital budget. People are happy, but this one in particular, I think that would help to answer some questions. And this one came through email, and I don't have a name attached to it, so I apologize beforehand. And it reads, "Thank you for the amazing capital budget for recreation. The projects are really important. How do we help the Department of Natural Resources have the resources to maintain all the trails and natural areas in our district? The budget really helps state parks, so what should we do to help DNR too?"
I mean, I can
Yeah, go
start
ahead.
with that. I mean, we're in a very beneficial spot for our district because Representative Callan is on the capital budget negotiating team for the House, and I'm on the negotiating team for the Senate. I think our district did quite well in the capital budget. We were successful in getting a lot of the trails funded from Mount Si to Tiger Mountain throughout, the Middle Fork and all these other great recreational opportunities we have. We use the capital budget to try to create the trails. A lot of what you're referring to in this question is the operating budget dollars that then we need to give DNR so they can actually maintain those trails. And so I think you're hitting the nail right on the head. So state parks, we build a park, and then it's up to the operating budget to provide resources to state parks to be able to staff and keep those parks clean so they don't look like crap. And we're in the exact same place in DNR with these trails where we have to make sure the operating budget in the next budget cycle has the resources to maintain the trails we're able to build. And I think it's a super valid criticism, and we have gotten a lot better with state park funding during my 9 years in the Senate. And I think it's a great suggestion that we could do the same thing at DNR so they can maintain these trails a lot better. It's a good idea.
Absolutely. I think rallying in and strengthening the voice in Olympia around these trails and what that means, and bringing it in full partnership with not only those that use the trails, but also, making sure that we're coordinated and connected with the tribes and all of the use that's there. When you bring a consolidated voice and you bring it big, then I think that helps us move the dial on it. I think especially in the 5th where we have so much DNR land, I think it's really, we have an opportunity to speak big and large and really bring a big voice in. So looking forward to working with stakeholders to elevate that.
We just need to get Representative Ramos on the operating budget negotiation.
Somebody's got to stand.
How I can build it, and then he can maintain it.
Yeah, and the trails are interesting because that was my profession back in the day, and it's always been problems to maintain trails as it is to maintain roads. We like to build new ones, but we don't like to maintain them as much because it's not as exciting. But I really want to bring out the fact that there is a volunteer trail maintenance system in our area that is phenomenal. Started by Washington Trail Association years ago, and hundreds of thousands of hours a year of people volunteering to help maintain these trails because they love them and they know that they're not being maintained enough by our budgets. And without that, we wouldn't have anything. And I really need to say we're doing that because of all the volunteer work. Yes, we have to get DNR and state parks and those other folks, additional funding to help lighten that load. But just a real big thank you to all the volunteers because to the trails we have to this day over the last 30 years have been maintained a large part by volunteers. So thank you.
All right. Hey, folks, you know what? It is 6:36, so we are past the halfway mark, and we're doing really, really well. And since I said, Mark, how about a question for the senator? And the question is, would you explain what your bill regarding GET credits was about, and if the changes made mean that I, as a parent, need to do anything on my end?
Oh, okay. So the GET program is a program that you use to save money for your kids' college. Like you buy a year of the UW, you buy now, even your kids like in kindergarten. That means whenever they want, they can go to UW for a year. and it's based off current pricing, not what it's going to cost 15 years later. But so the GET bill that I passed, and that we started in the Senate and passed both the Senate and the House, it lowered the price of GET units and tried to keep it closer to what UW tuition costs today. And it tried to make it clear that the GET committee can't have large increases in the price of buying these units. It has to stay closely tied to what the actual cost is of UW tuition. And that's the whole premise. And so if you have young kids, there's two programs in the state of Washington. You can buy the Dream Ahead 529 program, which is more traditional. Like you're going to put the money and it's going to be in the stock market and it's going to go up or down based on how the stock market does. And that's a traditional 529 plan. Or, you know, if you want to spend $12,000 right now, you can buy your tuition at the UW in any increment you want. You can buy half a year, you can buy a quarter year, you can buy 2 to 5 years. It doesn't matter. And that guarantees whatever the cost of tuition is, you know, when your kid needs to go to college, that they're going to be able to go. They'll receive whatever the cost is in the state of Washington. They can use it out of state if they choose to. They just get whatever the highest tuition is in our state, which usually is UW tuition, to be honest. Like my kid's going to Western next year. Western's tuition is like $3,000 cheaper than UW right now. So yes, I see Tim Harris, like forever stamps for education. That's okay. I'm going to use that next time. That's a much better way to explain it. It's forever stamps for education. I never thought of it that way.
All right. So moving on, here's a question from Nancy. Is there currently any legislation being considered to require telehealth, including teletherapy, to be required coverage on healthcare insurance plans in Washington beyond the pandemic emergency? This has become an excellent alternative, adjunct, or option for many families during the pandemic.
Oh, I absolutely agree, and certainly I think there is some there's consideration on how to improve and create the best practices, right, in terms of access, especially for rural Washington where we have very little. We're having big conversations around that in our Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group in terms of access to that and creating best practices around what does that look like and mean. We want to make sure that there's that you're getting quality service and that it is meaningful and beneficial, and we're putting a good understanding of what that looks like. And we're learning so much because of the quick ramp up of the access to it. So as we learn that and we have, the subject matter experts and providers that are really delivering, and we have those that are actually receiving services in that way, we get everybody to the table, we can figure out what's the best path forward, right? And to make sure that we're actually delivering it, and again, in a quality way that's also safe. I think that it's a game changer for sure in terms of being able to have access and equity to care. So I'm looking forward to it. I know I've done some work with Representative Marcus Riccelli, on some of the work that he passed, and that was around telehealth, specifically around audio only health, and then what we needed to do. And then we also passed some proviso work to make sure that we were talking about the best practices around telehealth for children and youth.
Yeah, and it was interesting that we started this before the pandemic. We actually passed a law to try to put in the future would have had, like a trial period with telehealth and, all this stuff that would be a slowly ramped up kind of option. And of course, the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden we said, well, this has to happen a whole lot sooner. So it really got ramped up quickly. But we'd put some of the wheels on the vehicle in place there a little bit, and then it just got ramped up. And I think the big piece, Rep. Callan mentioned about adding audio only, because in some areas of the state you can't do video, right? They don't have the access. They just have a phone that they can't do the video as well. So to give them access equally as well through audio only and not needing the video, that also works for folks that just don't have that video access. So I think we're well on our way on doing this. I've done some telehealth myself lately in the last couple of months. It's great. I don't have to go anywhere. I just, doc gets on the screen, you talk to them like you are in the office, and you're done. So I think it's not only a good thing for lots of options of folks that can't get there, it's also convenient for those folks that can and just save the travel. So it's here to stay. Everybody, like many things, you find out about how good it can be, and it sticks around.
I think the interesting thing, well, I was going to say the interesting thing to me on telehealth will be I mean, it should be a way to lower cost of healthcare delivery. At this point, we've done it because that hasn't been the primary goal, but I would like to think that in the next few years, we can really say what savings can there be from telehealth and how do you pass on those savings to Washington consumers. Nothing against the doctors on the line. I'm sorry. I'm sure we love you as well, but I don't want the savings from telehealth to just end up going in the doctor's pocket. It'd be really nice if there's a way for Washington residents to actually benefit. If it does end up, I think all the data indicates it's a cheaper way to deliver healthcare services, and I think our job in the legislature is to make sure Washington consumers can benefit from that savings.
Okay, so next we have a question for Representative Ramos from Joyce. And Joyce is asking, Washington State Department of Transportation has recently resumed truck parking workshops where the Washington State Patrol left off. Representative Ramos attended the Washington State Patrol workshops. Are you still committed to support solutions for the truck parking shortage in our state? And if so, how do you see yourself supporting those efforts?
Excellent, thank you. And for one reason or another, I've become the truck parking guy, which is fine. Somebody has to deal with truck parking. It's a very not exciting subject, but it's very critical to keep our roads and freight moving. Yes, that's correct. I started this process, and it started because of problems in the district with here and other places we've seen in the state. And what I did was there was a proviso added in the transportation budget that funding the continued work in that. So, matter of fact, just 2 days ago, I met with our Joint Transportation Committee and talked about how we're going to get a consultant in and continue that work that was started. We had like 2 or 3 meetings prior to the pandemic. And so, yes, we're going to pick up where we left off. It is going to be geared towards a very practical way of what we can get in place quickly, what simple solutions we can get, along with some big ones. We had folks from UW and technical solutions that could help as well. So it's a thing we have to solve in our state, but it's a national problem also. And so I am working on it. I just met on it 2 days ago, and it should be putting things together in these next couple months to continue that process.
Okay.
And I think people should know that there's a state patrol facility that'll be going in with a new way station out by North Bend, a really small one. But the state patrol has really partnered with us in making sure, like in North Bend, that these trucks that park and just clog the off ramps, like we're going to find a much better system than that. And it's hard to enforce right now because we don't really have a way to do local enforcement. But the state patrol acknowledges that the current system sucks. And once we get that way station open and there's people stationed there, I think there's going to be a very strong effort to make sure those trucks have a safe place to be rather than just parked on off ramps at exit 31, 32, and 34. Hopefully
it's certainly not going to happen overnight, though. I mean, finding places for that kind of parking and the amount of shortages that were qualified and quantified across, Western Washington coming to the ports and whatnot is it's not a trivial problem. So we've all heard about it a lot, and are certainly engaged in trying to find good solutions to move it forward. So we appreciate Bill going to the meetings and keeping us all in the loop, and then we will fight for it together.
Yeah, and just a clarification, Senator said that about a new way station, in case people are afraid, it's not in North Bend. It will be up at exit 42. So it will be outside of North Bend where the new way station will go in. That will be built as part of the Highway 18 I-90 interchange reconstruction. That's going to happen there, in that way station in the next few years will be built up there out of exit 42 area as well. So those that know the area, that might help a little more definitively.
Okay, so from the truck parking guy, we're going to go now to, I'm sorry, I just had to do it. Okay.
Thanks.
John has a question about rural residents. He's asking, are rural residents of the 5th District overshadowed by urban votes? How do you balance needs of rural voters?
I can answer that. I think you guys balance them every year at election time. I mean, if you're representative of the 5th Legislative District, you're not listening to rural voters, you're not going to be a representative in the 5th Legislative District for very long. And I think it's an important part. I mean, trying to have the state be a better partner with King County to help fund rural roads is something Representative Ramos and myself and Representative Callan have all worked on during our time in Olympia. And I think, when it comes to the urban growth boundary, I think we're ground zero of kind of the case study of why the legislature needs a better solution on some of these issues. Like, you have people in Seattle, they don't touch the urban growth boundary. They don't want any changes for any reason whatsoever. Whereas in the 5th legislative district, we have cities that then, 1 block away is considered outside the urban growth zone, has totally different rules. And I think the legislature really needs to sit down and have an honest discussion about how we provide some flexibility for districts like the 5th of how you account. For example, schools can't go outside the urban growth boundary, but in a lot of cases, it would make a lot of sense if there was some flexibility in that policy, and there should be. So I think that's some work ahead of us in legislature that will help rural residents for us to come up with some creative solutions that just aren't there as part of the current law.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the school example is a great one. Certainly with my past school board hat on, was in the middle of that battle and conversation for a long time. It cost the taxpayers a lot more money, right, to stay within the urban growth boundary, even though you're having to bus students in. So there's a lot of improvement that can happen for both the environment sake. I think when you balance that out and what's good for the environment and what's good for people. So I think there's a lot of conversations to be very nuanced there that matter, make a difference. And this whole conversation too, I think goes further even too with more rural spaces in incorporated King County and all of that space too, right? I mean, if you think about our landfills, if you think about where we are with all of the uses that supports the county-wide, I think that the urban impact and the rural impact are different. They're showing up different. So we need to make sure that what we're doing at the state level is really addressing and making sure everybody has a strong voice at the table and an equal and equitable voice at the table to make sure that we're passing legislation that makes sense for all and not overbalanced. And I totally agree with Senator Mullet that we wouldn't be doing our jobs unless we're out there making sure that we're having these conversations.
And I would just add, as my part, one of the committees I've been on from the start and always want to be on is the Rural Agricultural Natural Resources Committee. So I am covering that part always because our district, I consider our district a 50-50 split. We have small cities and we have unincorporated rural King County at probably about equal levels. And I consider that balance of how we have to do that. I think our district is unique because we have a lot that mix, a lot of that interface. I'm 2 blocks from State Park Forest. I mean literally. So I mean it's very close. We interplay with that quite a bit. We do try to take care of our unincorporated rural folks as well, and we pay attention to that. I've worked with the county a lot in some of their work because that's part of King County. They get to take care of services in the unincorporated part, and we try to work with them on that. And so to all of us, I think it's a very critical piece, and we don't leave either of those behind.
All right, next we have a question from Michael, and he would like you to address the asphalt plant. Says it needs to be stopped. Can you help save the environment? So what are your thoughts on the asphalt plant?
Call Dow Constantine and tell him you hate it.
Yeah,
it's a county permitting, and they're trying to permit it like right now. And if it's bothering you, we have no ability to. I mean, it's from our situation, we don't have a lot of power. The county council has a lot of power of what's going to happen with that asphalt plant, and we highly encourage people that have concerns to reach out to the county to make sure they're heard and do it ASAP. This thing is time sensitive. I would reach out to them tomorrow if you could find the time.
Yeah, it 100% is in the county's hands at this point. The state can't intervene and take a specific, parcel of land and change the land use code on it. That is, that's out of our jurisdiction. So certainly your voice loud and clear.
And we've heard enough, and I know that I've always said that our 5th district, that rural part of King County we were just talking about, often takes the brunt of this things that need to be provided for the rest of King County. This is an example of that. Now, we do need asphalt. We want to do a transportation package. We want to build and maintain our roads. So we do need to do that, but the location is critical, and next to the river is not the place in my mind to do that. So please make those calls, put that pressure on. They know where we stand. We've talked to our county reps and so forth, and they know where we stand for sure. And I think we're pretty united on that. But like I say, we don't have that power. Interesting. It's at a lower level than us.
Okay, next we have a question from Ken. Ken says, emergency clause / state of emergency situations must have the ability to move quickly and decisively. But the process of emergency powers should not be a wholly executive function for more than a year. The question now is, what do we plan to do about it?
I think it's a great question. I would say that I share Ken's frustrations with our governor in the emergency power space, and I think it's Representative Chapman's on the House side has spoken out pretty strongly about, people have to put on the hat and say, what if it was somebody from the opposite party having overreach and not acknowledging the legislature's role and everything else? People should be frustrated, and just because it's the governor's from our own party, I think the legislature really needs to step up and draw some better lines here on emergency powers. I know the tribes are at the end of the rope with this whole thing, and they're really ready to see some change as well. So I could see a coalition between our tribal leaders and the legislature, and hopefully we come back in 22 with something that's a lot better than what currently exists.
I think we've learned a lot, right, with how we are structured and what the rules are through this pandemic, and on many, many layers and levels. And there's no doubt that on many, many layers and levels, we can do better. And we need to take what we've learned, and we need to have deep conversations about them, and we need to make improvements. And that's across the board. That's on executive power. That's also, on how we're managing our public health system and how we're, there's just a full range of what we can do better, from learning where we are, not having ever experienced that before in our lifetimes, right? So it is, I think it's our obligation and our duty to have those deep conversations and figure that out.
Okay, next there are several questions about homelessness and housing. So instead of, asking all of those, can you just address what is being done to, address the homelessness situation and what steps have been taken this session regarding housing?
I will say from the capital budget, I've never seen, we pumped out so much money into housing. I've never seen anything like it, ever. It's a mind-boggling amount of money. We're in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And going back to what we were talking about with the climate bills, we're at a point now where we need to actually focus to make sure this money is doing what we need it to do, because the legislature has pushed the money out. And so now it's down to the not sexy part of actually implementing policy to make sure it's accomplishing the goals that it should be accomplishing. Because I really feel like the resources have been provided to move the needle in the homeless housing space, and hopefully it happens.
I think, housing is, I'm very excited at the capital budget investments. It was exciting to be at the table with Mark and have those conversations across chambers and really make those investments, which included rapid housing acquisition, right? So that is a great tool to have. And then we've seen in the areas where there was some acquisition and we were able to relocate during the pandemic, those out of shelter, those families and people that were experiencing homelessness in shelters into some rapid housing, how their situation improved. I think the rest of the story is tied to the support services around, what is needed to stabilize, right? So it's also jobs, it's also that opportunity, it's also behavioral health supports and services, and what does that look like and mean that's accessible, and where folks need it. So it's when and where it's needed and accessible and quality care. So I think those are also elements that were addressed during this last legislative session, and we need time to implement part of that. Part of that also came out as part of the conversation to support services around the Blake decision that came through and the legislative action on that. And then the ongoing work that this legislature is doing around all of that, both from, the whole spectrum again on age groups. You will see that I also don't want to make sure that our children, youth, and families are left out of the conversation, because they too experience the homelessness, and that has long-term high cost impact to the state. And it's all stuff that I think that we hopefully can start to really address.
All right, we have, sorry, go ahead.
I'll keep it short. I disagree with a lot of that. I think we've started to make moves in the right direction. I think for a lot of years we've been trying some similar methods that haven't really gotten us there, and the problems continue to grow. I think finally realized that some new things have to be tried, and I am very pleased to see some of the county stepping up on the hotels and using that from what we learned from COVID to really make some difference. So I'm feeling optimistic that in the next year or so we're going to start making some much better movements in that. But it's a long-term problem. It took us 30 years to get here. It's not going to be fixed in the next 6 months. But I believe we've made the turn, and we're heading in the right direction now.
Okay, we have like 3 minutes left. So how about we use 1 minute for each of you for closing remarks? And, some people were asking about specific anecdotes or funny things, or your favorite part of virtual session, or did you learn something, or are you excited about doing real session next time? So maybe share some of that in your closing remarks, please. And let's start with Representative Callan.
Well, certainly from a virtual reality world in the legislative session, it did function well. The thing that I really loved about it was the amount of access that we had to people across the state to testify. I had people testifying in our committees that we never would have had if we were down in Olympia, that just brought the real lived experience and the real story to the narrative that we needed to have for passing bills. I think that it's still very hard to get your voice heard in 1 minute. So I'm looking to figure out ways that we can do that in a better job. And I'm looking forward to being back into Olympia in person. The House had twice as many people as the Senate. And I got to see Senator Mullet, in his office down there popping in and doing a vote. And we missed that. We missed the ability to be able to do that real-time conversation and narrative and really get into the face-to-face contact of what we need to do. So I think we need to blend both those worlds, and looking forward to it, and excited for where we are, excited for seeing us being on the other side of the pandemic, and really capturing all of the lessons learned that we have to move forward and to continue making sure that everybody can recover wholly and fully. So
I'll back you up 100%. I think that's the best part of what happened. I think we need to keep that so folks have more access to us. So with all that great stuff said, I'll jump to the interesting thing. And I think the thing that's most interesting was who would get caught on camera saying something that they shouldn't be saying. And that happened to a number of folks a number of times, and we all get a good laugh out of it. And someone would realize they weren't on. They were on when they thought they were off. And that always brought us a good little chuckle.
Well, and as you heard tonight from my dog Boots, my challenge wasn't my 6 children. My challenge was my 3 dogs, and they had no understanding of when to shut the hell up. So I spent the majority of my time in Olympia working virtually. I would say maybe half the Senate ended up going down in person. It definitely wasn't anywhere close to a regular session, but I'm looking forward to being back down in person. And I don't know. I really miss the regular session. So I'm anxious for January to come around and have one where we're just all back there in person again. It'll be nice.
I do have to say that in-person town halls are great. I love having our individual coffee sessions too. During the interim, I'd go to each community across the region and be able to have those conversations. But I love being able to have the access of this virtual town hall as well, to all of, just making it again accessible for all of you to connect with us. So I really appreciate you all being here tonight with us and taking time out. And if you like this virtual environment, let us know so that we'll know how to continue and what is the best format, and if we should be doing both in-person and virtual town halls. There's also the option for a tele-town hall that's all telephone based. Various technologies that we can use, but the main goal that we have is wanting to make sure that we're connecting with you and answering your questions, and making sure that we're just staying connected to what's important to you right now. and as the time goes forward. So thank you again for everybody being here tonight and joining us.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining in. Thank you for your questions. I'm seeing some people asking about, when will the next one be? Well, we don't know, but as soon as we do know, we will send you guys an invite. So thank you so much for everything, and we will catch you next time. Good night.
If we pass the
Thank you all
transportation
very
package,
much.
we can do
Really
another.
appreciate your time.
There you go.
Thank you.